And currently, I am just restarting Western Classical after a almost 1-year break. Well, I've been doing Hindustani for 4 years with Mrs. Sejal Vedya. So, what are some differences between Hindustani and Western classical singing? First of all, you have the range of movement. In Hindustani vocal, as many of us know, a lot of times when you're singing, you want to slide solidly from one note to another, whereas when you're in Western singing, you want to almost glide down notes to make it seem more smooth and less solid. This is one minor difference, but one much more major thing is warm-ups and breath. In Hindustani, as you all know, how we warm up is we start by singing notes in a rag, alaps. This is meant to emphasize and solidify our understanding of the rag. Whereas in Western classical, a lot of times when you warm up, you don't even sing first thing. What you do is you breathe right and you try to open your throat. So I would like everybody to try one warm-up with me. It's going to be very brief and it'll sound a little silly, but I would just like everybody to try with me. This one is a pretty common one. You just have to sound like, and the best way to describe it is a fire engine. So this is meant to open up your throat. So how you do it is you go, ooh. Everybody try it with me? Ooh. So it's a little silly, but it's meant to open up your throat a lot more and have you sing in much higher and lower notes than you would usually. As well, there's the difference of vocal range. In Hindustani, when I first came to Hindustani almost 5 years ago, I was able to sing much better in higher notes than I was in lower notes. As Ms. Sejal knows, my lower range has improved a lot. Before, I was barely able to sing lower knee, but now I can get much lower than I was able to when I had just done Western music. As well as this, there's notation and learning technique differences. In Hindustani, there are, of course, notation systems, but they are a little bit less solid than Western systems are. If I write down, because there's sheet music, as you can see, I think that's a sheet music book right over there. If you open it up, you'll see sheet music. And if I wrote down some sheet music of a composition I had made and gave it to any other person who could read sheet music, they would be able to pick up the exact notes. Whereas if I gave my note papers from Ms. Sejal to somebody else who does Hindustani, they would be able to get the lyrics, sure, but they might not be able to get the extent of what is to be performed perfectly because of the way everything is done. This is in my experience. So there's also testing differences in Hindustani vocal. We do exams, whereas in Western vocal, I haven't really encountered any kind of examinations that we do. So obviously there are a lot of differences, but what are some similarities? Although they come in two very different ways, vocal strength comes in both Hindustani and Western vocal singing. In Western, there is a term called vibrato. It's Italian and it means vibrate. When a singer's voice is very strong, their voice will vibrate a little bit, not because it's shaky or they're nervous, but because of the actual wavelength that that singer is singing at. It's so precise that you can start to hear the slight vibrations in somebody's vocal tone. In Hindustani, this comes too, although it's not emphasized as much in my experience. The vocal strength you can hear is almost the same in Western and Hindustani. Another similarity is that there are two sort of main styles in Hindustani and Western. In Hindustani classical, you have classical and semi-classical singing. This is a performance level distinction, so you're able to do classical and semi-classical rags. There is a similar thing in Western theory, the concept of musical theater versus operatic singing. In musical theater singing, it's a lot more reedy. Another warm-up that you do a lot of times when you do Western classical singing is to sort of do this, E, from the nose. Whereas when you do operatic style singing, it requires you to open up your mouth a lot more. It's like the typical, very, very fancy singing that you see when you see a recording or something. That's usually operatic style singing if it's Western classical. As well as this, there are similarities in tals. Can somebody name some tals for me? I'm sure everybody can name tals. Yeah? Teen tal? Yeah. Ek tal? Oh, okay. Ek tal. Can anybody name another tal? Chap tal? Yeah. One other one? Rupak. So, yeah? Dadra. So the things that you've named, like chaptal, dintal, dadra, all of these things have their equivalents. Can anybody name some time signatures for me in Western classical music?
3/4.
Yeah, 4/4, 3/4. Can anybody name any others? 6/8. Yeah. So all of these things, these Western and Hindustani like beat systems have their own equivalents. So dadra can be sort of equated to 3/4 or 6/8, and chaptal can be equated to 5/4. Tintal can be equivalent to 4/4, and tintal and 4/4 are also the most common forms of tal. Common time is also called 4/4 because it's just used everywhere. So that's one really major similarity between Western and Hindustani music is their style of beat keeping. That's basically all I have prepared. Does anybody have any questions about the comparisons between Hindustani and Western music?
How difficult is it to combine in the same song?
It really depends on how difficult it is to combine based on what you want to do. For example, if I wanted to combine something basic, if I wanted to combine a musical theater song with a classical tal, with like a classical rag, it would be a little bit harder than trying to combine, like if you wanted to do something Bollywood and something with Western pop music, just because of the stylistic distinctions between the two. Does anybody have any other questions?
I have one. Between the two styles, which do you think is more difficult to perform?
To perform, I would say both of them are difficult in their own way. With Western music, there are a lot of stylistic differences you have to focus on. With Hindustani music, obviously it's just about it's about getting everything out and being able to perform everything. So I can't really say which one's harder, which one's easier. Yes, you have a question?
What thought did you not get when you first started it?
What tal did I not get when I first started? That's a good question. Ek tal, because when I started out learning music, I learned informally from my grandfather, but when I first started learning music formally, it was Western, and Western does not have a very common equivalent for ek tal, so when I first learned it, I didn't really understand it as much because I didn't know how to connect it to Western music in my mind. Good question. Does anybody have a final question? Yeah? When did I start singing? Oh wow. I started singing, I learned from my grandfather when I was 3 years old, so that's when I first started. But I started learning formally with a studio when I was 7, so it's your age.
That's how old I am.
Yeah.
You already started singing though, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're ahead of the game.
Sandeep, do you have a question?
I have one question.
Yeah.
What is the ideal fusion of Indian and Western influence?
There are many different variations on this question. For me, I would say it would be for tal terms, it would be tintal or 4/4, just because it's very common. It would probably be in a simplistic rag, something that you would learn earlier on, so like Bhupali or something, just to make it easier, because in Bhupali, because of the tar, there are a lot of similar songs in Western style, so you could connect some songs in Bhupali to operatic songs in Western classical.
So are they pre-composed compositions?
Yeah, they're pre-composed.
There's others in the room who also know Western, so if you want to jump in and answer, help out me, feel free to do so.
So is there, I have a question. So in Hindustani, and in fact even in Carnatic music, this concept of rag, which limits the number of notes, the types of notes you can sing. Is there a similar concept in Western music?
I'd say there isn't an exact equivalent, but there are keys. So, for example, if you take what we're singing in, right, what I was singing in, right, it was A, so that's a key that you can sing in. There are also different styles of notes. There's like Lydian, and I'm not really well versed in that sort of thing, that's just not my domain. But there are different modes of singing that you can do, which I say could be comparable to the rags that we have in Hindustani. Alright. Yeah?
Thank you.
Do you have any weaknesses in singing?
She doesn't practice enough. That's the
Of course, of course. I would say my weaknesses in singing are I tend to get a little bit too focused on one particular thing, and I don't really focus on what's outside of one thing that I can do, so like one skill or one song, and I don't really focus on all of the other things that are outside of it.
Shani, I hope you are recording it. You should be telling what to read.